Hello, it's Reija, and welcome to the first live show of 2023. This is the January Sunday 8th live show for the Shorts and Sorcery Book Club. And today I am going to be talking about Africa Risen, a new era of speculative fiction, edited by Sheree Renee Thomas, Ogenechoe Donald Ekpeki, and Zelda Knight. And this was the December book club pick for the Shorts and Sorcery book club. And I have to say that I was actually very pleasantly. I wasn't surprised because I had expectations. I was expecting something riveting and something exciting, and I do feel like this collection actually like really managed to not only meet my expectations, but in some ways actually surpass them. Obviously, not all of the stories in this collection were my favorites because, like with anthologies, sometimes you just don't gel with all of the stories. Sometimes some of the theming does not resonate, etc., etc. So I feel like uh, most of the time, um, you will end up having like favorites, and you will end up having like some stories that you didn't enjoy as much. So I am expecting this live show to go on for about 30 to 40 minutes because I have a lot of ground to cover. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the project of this anthology, what it is trying to do. Then I am going to talk a little bit about the sort of content warnings and possible triggers for people. Uh, Obviously, this has so many different stories that each of them have their own content warnings, but I will go over some of the ones that are pretty significantly present in a lot of the stories. And then I am going to talk a little bit about the stories that were not necessarily my all time favorites in the collection, but I want to mention them because I thought that they were doing something really interesting nonetheless, even though they weren't my favorite. And then I have a bunch of favorite stories that I feel like uh, I might be wanting to nominate even in some of the awards, for example, in the Hugos. Happy 2023 for you as well. Like it's hopefully this will be a better year than last year because last year was a lot. So I would want to put this somewhere where you can actually see it. So maybe, yeah, I have such like small table that that's not gonna work. So this is it. This is what we're talking about. I'm just gonna put it to the side. So first of all, the project of this whole anthology is that it is a cooperative work between um, authors working in the living and working in the African continent, as well as all of the authors who are living in various diasporas, who are like people who have African descent. So in that sense, this feels like a very joyous cooperation because like this is all about this idea that it the the collection, the anthology, puts itself sort of as this bridge between the diasporas and the continent, and it is also like actively working against this idea that people from the continent and people living in diasporas are somehow in opposition to each other. And I felt like that is like one of the crucial themes is like cooperation, and also like finding joy in your roots, and also finding joy in like experiencing things outside of your like own origin, if that makes sense. I also found it really interesting that this collection had like authors from a bunch of different countries. Like obviously you have authors from the United States, you had authors who are living in Canada, UK, Australia. So those are the authors who are basically like in the diasporas. But then you have authors who are from Uganda, Nigeria, Trinidad and Tobago, Zimbabwe, Egypt, Senegal, Kenya, Ghana. Those are all represented here. And for myself, I have mostly read from authors from Nigeria myself. So I thought that finding these new authors who are from these different parts of Africa and hearing and like reading their stories was really cool. Like and the book also includes like all of the like author biographies at the end, so that's also like really fantastic. So like as I was reading some of the stories, I was like, oh yeah, I will look up that author, and then there's a bio and contact information and everything. It was great. So yeah, this collection had so many authors that I want to read more from now. Uh, so that's one thing. I mean, for me, I'm just glad that if you are able to read it at any point at all, because like that is like this collection definitely feels like I feel like it needs a little bit more love. Obviously, it just came out in November, so it has only been out for like 2 months now. So a lot of people on BookTube haven't been able to read it, but that's this is like that meme from Starship Troopers. I'm doing my part, essentially. I want to talk about this, and I want that other people will be able to find this anthology and feel encouraged to try it out. So now, before I go over the stories that I want to mention, I will go quickly over some content warnings. Obviously, this collection deals a lot with, like, one of the central themes in this collection across multiple stories is the deconstruction of colonialism and deconstruction of the history and the effects of the Atlantic slave trade. So there are content warnings for violence, there are content warnings for enslavement, and also content warnings for sexual violence. A lot of these stories deal with sexual assault. So that is something to keep in mind. And especially like a couple of stories that I want to highlight that weren't necessarily my favorites. I want to mention them because I felt that the stories were taking risks and were pretty interesting. So the first one of those I want to mention is A Girl Crawls in a Dark Corner by Alexis Brooks de Vita. And this is a story that takes place in the southern, like, United States. You're not really sure where the story takes place, but you know that it is on a plantation, and it is a very intimate story. It takes mostly place inside like a single cabin, like a shack, and it is a story about this woman who is haunted by the ghost of her daughter, and you don't first know what this haunting means, why she is being haunted, and then gradually it is revealed to you, and it is actually like it is a tragedy, and it is a story that ends in a sort of hopeful way. There is a comeuppance, and there is a sort of like like I want to say that the whole story is this like build up of very uncomfortable tension, and then the ending climax, like the ending resolution, like it feels like a release. So it's very satisfying in that sense. Um, and I thought that this was really interesting in the topic that it was discussing, which was that of female like genital mutilation. This is a story that deals with that, and also not only critiques it, but also like sort of brings awareness to why it was practiced, and why it has been practiced, like culturally and like real as a religious practice. uh, I personally have like very conflicted ideas about the whole process, because I do not advocate for it, and I feel like the story kind of walks a very thin line between not like critiquing and not advocating it, and also kind of revering the original practice. So it's like it's a very thin line, and your mileage may vary on how you choose to like kind of what's your takeaway from the story, how you choose to read this. For me, it was kind of like I did feel kind of uncomfortable with it, because like it at least at the very start of the story, it felt like the author was not necessarily praising the practice, but like was not putting enough distance between this sort of like positive reading, essentially. But that could also just be my bias and my interpretation of the text. It just, like as I said, it's a very thin line. So, but I feel like I have never read anyone discuss the practice of genital mutilation in any SFF story ever. So in that sense, I thought that this was interesting. It like dealt with like very interesting themes, and the idea of like it's basically the story is about men controlling women's bodies. That like that is essentially it, and what are the lengths at which men are willing to go to control women's bodies, and also how women um, have been made complicit in those acts. So I think that was very interesting. And similarly, another story that deals with sexual assault and like child SA is A Soul of Small Places by Mame Boguma Diene and Wopa Diallo. And this essentially is all about these like rural communities. And there's this sort of like practice that when children are going to school in this like rural village, um, that there's this sort of seasonal thing that uh, men from us, this sort of like herding clan, come and basically capture children from the school road and assault them, and then those children are forcibly married off to these to their assaulters. And it is essentially like a look at how when these children are being forced to go through this, it's like this, okay, we just grin and bear it. But then when the violence starts to affect like men in the community, that's when things start to be like taken notice of, and solutions are being presented. And I thought that that was really like interesting. And there's also this idea of like this a sort of there's this sort of like jinn, a supernatural being that sort of takes revenge upon these like perpetrators. And I just felt like it was this interesting marriage between speculative elements and also bringing in like kind of real world issues into the story. I thought that it was very interesting. Like not my favorite, but as I said, a lot of the stories in this collection, like even if I personally didn't like gel with them, I felt that they were taking risks, which is something that I have been loving this year. Is when I've been reading stories that really like push the envelope, so to speak. And this definitely did that, and I felt so torn at the end, because it was essentially like the ending of the story kind of feels like how trauma is passed along, and how sort of these sort of kind of like toxic coping mechanisms can also be passed along to other people. So that was interesting. And the last story before I go over my actual like favorites is The Papermakers by Aqua Leslie Hope. And this was all about community building, and this kind of like, essentially, like if anyone has read Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill, it is all about like keeping old traditions and old crafts alive. And the papermaker's story is essentially kind of like that. It is essentially like coming together as a community, um, and keeping alive these old ways of working, in this case, like making paper, uh, and sort of like imbuing them with magic. And it's like there was this idea of intentionality, how when you put intention into something you're making, that is a kind of magic. And there's this kind of magic system in the story of like, just, you know, when you are making something, when you are creating something, and you imbue it with the magic, and your the magic of your thoughts, your intentions, your ideas, your goals, and also like this kind of accumulates because the tools and the materials you are using have also been imbued with someone else's thoughts and stuff. And that is the kind of like magic, that when the paper goes out to make placards for protests and stuff, it becomes like a powerful defense, like an actual shield for the protesters. I thought that was really interesting and nice. And I kind of wish I could have like a novella, or like even a novel exploring this same topic by this author. Like, I thought that the premise of this story was really interesting, even though the story itself doesn't really like, it doesn't have like an immediate um like plot arc. Like it isn't a very like action heavy. It's basically all about these people working together, eating dinner together. Like you are just let in to see a glimpse of these people's lives. And so in that sense, it doesn't have a lot of conflict. It doesn't have a lot of like intrigue. So in that sense, it wasn't like, it didn't stand out from the rest, aside from this idea of this magic system. And I just wanted to mention it because I thought that that was so neat. Yes, exactly. I definitely, I feel like if I had read any of this content from, let's say, uh, let's say an author who was not part of these identities and cultures, I would be even more uncomfortable. But you know, that is. I'm just very happy that this anthology exists. There were so many stories that I really liked, and I am going to talk about them right now. So the very first story that I really liked was Mummy Wata Works by Russell Nichols. And this is essentially about a post climate change world, a kind of post apocalyptic world where these communities are essentially surviving in a world that is in a state of perpetual drought. And they are surviving essentially by adhering to this very strict, almost cult like religious code uh, that determines who gets to have water, who gets, like, how much do they get to have it, essentially. And people who go against the code are essentially punished, and punished very severely. And there is the main character of the story is a girl who essentially she's brilliant. She's an inventor, and she wants to come up with these like solutions, and invent and create solutions um, that will help the community, and will help them not only to survive but to thrive. And in order to do that, she has to go against the like people who manage the system. And I thought that this story was really great. If you enjoy like climate fiction, and you enjoy like um, main characters who are uh, inventive and active, and also not always perfect in their approach to things. Like the main character essentially kind of makes a mistake in believing that, like, she kind of approaches the system in a kind of naive way, and that is the, like, sort of like the conflict at the end of the story, where she goes to the, like, upper, like, the people who manage the system, and uh, doesn't get the results that she was expecting, because she trusted too much that the system would be more malleable to her. And I just thought that this was such a fantastic story. I really hope that, like, uh, people find it as interesting that I found it. I really liked it. And the other story that I want to talk about, kind of in duet with Mami Wataworks, is Cloud Mine by Timi Odueso, because this is similarly about a community surviving drought, and surviving in an environment where there basically is this, like, cataclysmic, like, climate event that has happened. The, like, surround like the environment is completely unable to produce any water. And this is also interesting because this story, whereas Mami Wataworks was definitely science fiction, like full on science fiction, Cloud Mine is kind of like, you are not sure if it is science fiction or fantasy, because it straddles the line between, like, is this technology or is this magic? And I thought that was fascinating. It isn't really, like, explained that well, and it doesn't have to be, but as a reader you are kind of tickled by it. You're kind of like, oh, which way is it? And it's, like, very interesting. But basically in this, um in Cloud Mine, there are these two children, and they are going on this, they're basically exploring together and talking while they're trying to look for water. And the main character's uncle has gone to, like, fetch essentially a person or a being that is able to create water, or basically able to uh, cause rain. And they are talking about this idea of, like, how these beings are being treated, and whether cruelty is, like, the fuel behind their powers, because, like, all of the other communities that have these beings that can make this rain are treated very poorly, and the community is thriving, but the actual, like, um, actual being is obviously not, because they are basically enslaved to the purpose of, like, being essentially a function. Like, they are being reduced to a function. Their personhood is denied, and that is the very interesting thing. And also, like, this idea that the main character is constantly calling the the being a she, a her, whereas the others are calling them it. So it's like, uh, the children, the child characters, recognize the personhood of these beings, but the adults who are controlling them have reduced them to the function of, like, just being there to stimulate the climate to do things that they want. And I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, definitely one of my more favorite stories. I really hope you get to it too, because, like, there are some stories in this collection that are really, really fantastic. The next one I want to talk about is The Soul Would Have No Rainbow by Yvette Lisandlovu. And this story uh, is essentially about, like, it is a dual timeline story, and it is, like, dealing with a base. It has, like, the main character is the granddaughter, and her grandmother has died, and she inherits her grandmother's recipe book and realizes that her grandmother might have been a supernatural being. And there's another timeline um, that essentially goes over the grandma's life when she was like a servant and had to and was also part of the resistance for the like resisting the colonial regime of the nation at that time. And I just this one was very interesting. Like if I had to rank the stories, sure, this story probably wouldn't be at the top, but I just felt that it was very intriguing in how this like talks about resistance and how every person has their part and has their like talents and how those can be utilized um, as part of like resistance movements. I thought that was nice. And also I really liked that it had like this dual timeline, and both the granddaughter and the grandmother had like very different like voices, which I also really liked. And then there was the housewarming for a lion goddess by Aline Mwezi Nyonsenga. And this one is essentially about someone who is recovering from very disappointing, maybe traumatic, maybe abusive relationships where they were being used. And it is kind of like this idea of like how a person can self-sabotage themselves when they are going into a new relationship, and how even though they like fully understand that this relationship is different and they are not going to do those same things, and like they are they are treating it differently, how that past trauma can cause you to self-sabotage yourself, where you actively push people away. And this idea of how much to reveal about yourself, and if the person will look at you the same way if they realize like your true nature and your true past. I thought that that was really interesting, and the idea that the main character is like an actual like supernatural being living in modern times. I just always like that trope. To me is like candy, like you have like a goddess or a spirit or something that has lived uh, through millennia, and then they are just existing in a modern setting with people. I really like that trope, so I really enjoyed this story as well. And then I have two more stories to talk about before I talk about my top three stories. Basically the top three stories that I would nominate in a heartbeat if the like Hugo nominations opened up right now. But first of all, there is the Sugar Mill by Tobias S. Buckle. This is another story that had like a haunting in it, and it also looks at gentrification and also the sort of exploitative tourism that is happening, for example, in Caribbean communities. It has this. The main character is a local man in like a Caribbean island, and he is a realtor to this property that this white couple from United States has come to buy, essentially, and he is being haunted by people, his ancestors, and also people um, from the sugar mill that the white couple is aiming to buy, um, in order to prevent him from selling it. Like the ghosts are essentially telling him that these people should not buy the property and they should know what it really is. And this idea that the white couple is essentially would literally whitewash and build over a very traumatic, bloody history and erase the people who lived there. I thought that was really interesting. This story was not only very like like this had surprising joy in it, because it is essentially like confronting your own roots, like finding connection with your past, and also it is about a small resistance, essentially, that you don't always have to like be in this very like big protests or like part of these huge movements. You can actually do like small resistances as an individual as well. So that was really interesting, and it was also like surprisingly funny. There was a lot of humor in this story. So the Sugar Mill by Tobias S. Buckle was very good, I think. And then another one I really liked was Ghost Ship by Tananarive Due. This one has a little bit of a content warning for a virus outbreak. So if you have also like be if you have also lived through the pandemic with the idea that you do not want to read any pandemic fiction, Ghost Ship by Tananarive Due, like just know that there is a viral outbreak. Um, but I also think that this was such an interesting story. It is essentially the story takes place fully on a ship. It is also very much a science fiction story. There is like genetically modified animals at play, who are very cute, or who is very cute, until the viral outbreak, I should say. But anyway, this one is like it talks about indentured servitude, and how other people also like strip away people's humanity, like when they consider you to be of lower class or lower caste, or as a in terms of like this fascistic thinking, you are reduced to your basic function. In this case, you are functioning as a servant, and your purpose is to do the tasks assigned to you, and aside from that you have no personhood. That is essentially what the story is sort of like talking about, and how in the face of things, when shit hits the fan, all these class distinctions and all of them, they are just made up, and anyone is fair game. So it kind of deals with how ridiculous even putting people in these different like categories and assigning them worth based on their function is like ridiculous and cruel. So yeah, very interesting. I keep saying very interesting, but a lot of these stories were. Yes, like I will say each of these stories really does pack a punch. Even the stories that I didn't like or that didn't stick out to me that much. Like I kept like, first of all, I was listening to this collection on audio as well as reading the physical. So what I did was I had the headset on, I listened to it on audio and followed every story as well. So I was basically immersion reading the whole time, because I felt like that has been lately a lot easier for me to consume the stories, because um, it for some reason I have found it very hard to focus on just reading the words. I need to also listen to them. And the audiobook as well. The audiobook has like 5 or 6 different narrators. So each story is narrated by a different um, a different voice actor from the 5 or 6 that were available. And I felt that that was very nice, because like it immediately, like because the story was told by a different narrator, then it sort of like gave distance, like as I was reading like multiple stories back to back, it just gave each story like that oomph as well, because there was a different narrator, so that made them stand out even more. So if you can, I would actually say that if you could try listening to the audio as well while you're reading the physical, I would recommend, because I thought that that was a very nice way to um, very nice way to like consume the collection. Like yeah, and packing a punch like this, like I love when an anthology makes me think. And this really made me think. Like there were so many themes and topics here where I was like, oh, I didn't see it that way, or I didn't think about it in that sense, or you know. So yeah, I'm just very happy when, like, even when it isn't like, okay, so here's the thing. The way Spring Arrives, that was edited by Regina Kanyu Wang, was one of my favorite things last year. And I feel like this kind of does the same thing. Like this one is also very much in the same vein in terms of like what it wants to achieve, what it wants to explore, and all of these different topics that it covers. It like really makes, like, it just tickled me. So I'm very happy that I got this, um, and very happy that I read it. Um, okay, so now I only have the final three, my top three picks. Like these, for me personally, these may not be for everyone. So, if you choose to read this anthology, your favorites might be very different from mine. But basically, the three stories that I think justify the price of admission for this anthology are Hanford Driver by Adanadi. This one is essentially a story about a queer man who takes a job from his like a long time acquaintance, long time like friend, to drive this like hover bus basically that is based on like the Dunford cars, and it is this string of unfortunate events that ends up with him like sort of also forming a tentative like attraction to another man. And it was just such a funny, joyous story that takes place in this like sci-fi like sort of like near future Nigeria. And I just thought that it was like, I could see Hunt for Driver by Aranadi being like adapted into like a comedy, like a sci-fi comedy in the vein of like Space Sweepers in terms of tone, because it really like felt joyous and funny. And I would have wanted to like see it go even further, because I really like the character. The character is like very, the narrative voice and the main character's voice are is like very like sort of like this sort of like put down, like kind of like, oh no, I can't believe I have to do this, and this sort of like not down on their luck. Like how to even describe it? They're not down on their luck necessarily. They're just very like uh they have zero fucks to give about like what anyone else like thinks of them. Like I just love that sort of like character. So Hanford Driver was like feel good, made me smile, a really joyous story. Um, really liked it. And then um, the Lady of the Yellow Painted Library by Tobi Ogunderan. Really like this as well. This one is kind of like horror. It's like horror fantasy, and it essentially follows the story of this salesman um, that has that gets a notice from a library that says that you have forgot to return a book. Please return the book before we give you a punishment for the delayed return. And he goes to the library and says, I don't have the book. And everything that goes from there, and it is like this super like tension filled ride of like mounting horror of all the things that happen after. And I loved it. This story was so good. Like it just has this like mounting tension, and like every time you think that the main character is about to like find a resolution, something else happens. And it was such a lovely story. And I think that it also has layers. I'm feeling that it might have some um like social commentary on various things that I just like, I would need to reread it Both this and Hunt for Driver, by the way, like I feel like I will be wanting to reread these stories, uh, both of them, because they were like really good. Both of these also kind of kept me engaged the whole way through. Like I was there wasn't a moment where I was like, what else to do or thinking about filing my taxes. I was really hooked to both of these stories. And then the story that was my personal favorite couldn't be any more different from any of the other stories. First of all, content warnings abound. Content warnings include sexual assault, also sort of like coercion and like restriction of freedom, um, and yeah, like this is a hard story, and it is Peeling Time Deluxe Edition by Tlot Samase. And this story essentially, um, it is a sort of like a demonic horror story where, and it deals with like the music industry, but also as our with our culture in general. And the idea is that there is this man who makes a deal with a demon, a jinn, sort of, um, in that allows him to travel to women's dreams and essentially get inspiration to create art, in this case music and music videos, um, by basically like stripping the women of their like beings, of their like selves, and he makes art out of that. And it very much like um associates that with assault, and with like also like this idea of like how women are often uh in the like entertainment industry, how women are often left unable to speak about the things that they have had to go through in order to advance on in their careers, and how often uh, the men that are perpetrators of these like assaults don't get punished, or they are able to have thriving careers, um, um, despite doing these despicable things. And this story essentially takes all of that, but makes it a sort of revenge story. Like it kind of gives agency back to the women through this one main like female character, um, who fights back. And yeah, I just thought that this was very interesting. It is told in these little snippets of like song lyrics, and like the idea is that there is this like there's a soundtrack essentially that you're following a sort of soundtrack of like an album. And and then after each of these like sort of like snippets of song lyrics, you get like an aside of like what is happening. And it was really interesting. Like this story is like a really gruesome. Is essentially there is this very intentional note about this idea of like men going stealth essentially. So basically like saying to telling their like intimate partner that they're going to use protection, and then not using it, and allowing the person they're being sexually active with to basically making them believe that they are using protection while they are actually not. And there was this very intentional scene that like showed that on page and was critiquing it and was talking about it. And I thought that that was like really like good to have these conversations, and to like bring awareness to that, because that is something that does happen. And I really like this. And if if the Hugo nomination period ever happens this year, um, I'm definitely like this is one of my standout stories for now. I'm really eagerly awaiting what the award season will bring, and I can't wait for other people to read this. Also, I feel like I have a very like gruesome taste because I like, yeah, the Hunt for Driver, the Lady of the Yellow Pen Library, feel good, yay, and then I'm like, here's peeling time. Let's talk talk about sexual assault and a story that completely focuses on that as the main central theme, and the exploitation of women in the media industry. And I'm like, yep, this one was my favorite story in the whole anthology. What does it say about me? Yay. I'm very happy that you have enjoyed this review, this discussion, this go over of all the stories, and I can't wait to see what stories end up being your favorites as well. Because like I think that this anthology has a lot of potential. I can see a lot of different stories that other people in, for example, my own like friend group might like more than me, and like I can also see that some of these stories that I liked and were my favorites might not work for everyone. So I'm like, I just feel like this anthology has like endless potential. And yeah, um, so there you have it. This has been my discussion slash review slash everything about Africa Risen, a new era of speculative fiction, edited by Sheree Renee Thomas, Ogene Chove, Donald Ekpeki, and Zeld Knight. And I'm very glad I read it. I'm very glad to own it. And I will definitely be tabbing my favorite stories in order to reread them again in the future, especially Hunt for Driver. I might actually reread Hunt for Driver very soon. Not necessarily because it was my ultimate favorite, because that was peeling time, but because that was just so fun. Like that, like I feel like I could read Hunt for Driver by Adanadi after each story or book just as a palate cleanser. So maybe that really is my shadow favorite. Like maybe Hunt for Driver really is the standout. Anyway, really enjoyed this collection. And yeah, I will be back next week with like regular scheduled videos. So on Wednesday, you should be getting my December reading wrap up, and then I will have some goals, intentions videos, and also my best of the year lists going up soon. I have already started filming again, so I'm back from my hiatus officially next week. And also, I will be posting the Shorts and Sorcery Book Club feedback form on all my future videos for the duration of January and February. I should have it ready next week to post on the description of the like future videos that I'm going to be putting out next week, because the book club itself will be on hiatus for January and February, and I will be collecting feedback and will be doing some restructuring and stuff for the book club in order to run it smoother and better for this coming year. And then in March, hopefully we will have um, another book club pick that we can read. Most likely it will be a magazine, because like this one was an anthology, so obviously next pick would be a magazine. So I will see what I will pick. And thank you so much for coming and joining and watching this live. And have a very happy rest of your Sunday. And I will see you in the interwebs and in the next video. Bye bye.